Our guest on the Motivation Show is the author of three New York Times best-selling baseball biographies, Sandy Koufax, A Lefty's Legacy, The Last Boy, Mickey Mantle and the End of America's Childhood, and The Big Fella, who else? Babe Ruth and the World He Created. Her current book is Make Me Commissioner. I know what's wrong with baseball and how to fix it. Well, let's find out about that. This is
You're the
now the
wait,
talk
wait,
of
wait, 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 wait.
baseball.
You're the first guy to have said that title right. I am grateful. Thank you.
Here
It's
we
the New York,
go.
it's the Queens in you, Queens boy in you.
There
Good.
we go. You can take the boy out of Queens, but you can't take the
Can't take the
Queens out of
Queens
the
out of the
boy.
boy. Right.
So let's find out what this is all about. Welcome to the Motivation Show, Jane Leavy.
Hi, I'm Levy because an Irish sign painter added an A to my great great grandfather's name after when he got enough money together to open a little tailor shop, a hole in the wall on the Lower East Side. He figured it was spelled like O'Leary or something. And that, he didn't care because after all, it wasn't his real name anyway. It had been changed at Ellis Island. So I go into the Washington Post for my interview. This is how my sports career and my baseball writing career got launched. And Ben Bradley himself looks at me and says, Levy, you spell your name funny. And I said, so do you. And he said, you're hired. And that's how it all got started.
I wish life was that simple for all of us.
Yeah, of
Tell a joke and you're in, right? I like that. So, Jane, do you have a favorite team?
course, I'm a Yankee fan.
All right.
And you know the reason why, because my grandmother literally lived one long loud foul ball from home plate at the old real Yankee Stadium. And I could
In
sit
the Bronx.
in the Bronx on, just off the Grand Concourse on a street called Walton Avenue, which was originally Butternut. It had just been changed because in 27, the whole area, I mean, it's only 4 years after the ballpark opened, 27, all those empty lots got filled in with apartment buildings, and they were considered swanky. Come to find out, my uncle, who grew up in that apartment, um, was the mechanical engineer who did all the work on the 73, 74 renovation of the old ballpark. And he told me about how when they were trying to lower the field, and when they lowered the field, the dugouts flooded because underneath Yankee Stadium is Cromwell's Creek,
Ooh.
which they had filled in with what they dug out when they built the subway up on the Grand Concourse. And it was when that land, that wet land, they were literally wetlands, shifted, that the girders came loose in the upper left field stands, and that's when George M. Steinbrenner III said, "Okay, we're out of here, finally,"
Hmm.
and built a new ballpark.
Well, I want to get back to the fact that you're a Yankees fan. Now, back in 1960, we had 16 baseball teams. In 1969, which is my favorite year because you can see my
I
background
know,
there.
I know, I
Yeah,
get it.
I'm on the other side of town, the Flushing kid, we had 24 teams and now we have 30 teams. So the question begs, really, Yankees had 27 world championships with 30 teams. Could that ever happen again?
No, although the Dodgers are going to make a good run at it because they've got all that money. And
On
God knows,
paper,
I, I
it's
I
ridiculous.
wouldn't go, I won't be surprised if they end up signing what's his face? Oh, they won't take Bellinger back. They didn't like Bellinger. The Texan guy, the guy who was at the Cubs for a year. I'm having a brain lock. The outfielder, King Tuck. Tuck.
Kyle Tucker
Yeah, I won't be surprised if they go for him and get rid of
wouldn't shock me.
T. I mean, I like Teander, but it's like anyway. No, I don't think you're going to see that again. And I think part of what's going on with baseball and their intent on expanding again into 32 teams because it'll make all the playoff structures better and it's more shekels, more money. in a $12 billion industry. Um, and but the ta talent is diluted. I mean, you're not seeing teams that are as great as teams as what you saw in the 60s, what I saw, and across the river and the bay and another river in the Bronx, because the talent is so diluted. And I for sure Rob Manfred's going to do it, and you're going to put more teams in small markets like Nashville or something, and somewhere else, and you're going to have the same issue that he has with small market teams today, which is that they can't compete with the Dodgers, the Mets, the Yankees, the Cubs to the extent they like to spend money, and the Red Sox to the
Well, is that part of what's wrong with baseball? The fact that really big
absolutely.
market teams with the big budgets, I mean, it's like you can pre-predict who are likely going to be in that
Yes.
top, 10 tier. Of course, there are other factors that sometimes another team sort of gets in there that you don't expect. But for the most part, every year you've got that same top tier of teams. And it's kind of unfair, no?
It is kind of
Yeah.
unfair, and it comes from, I mean, one of the parts of the book that I was really happy with, and you don't get authors to say that too much, was the history part, where I explained that it goes all the way back to the 1870s and the formation and organization of the National League, by a man named William Holpert, who was an owner. And this was a ragtag, not polite kind of. If they think guys are giving people, razzing them too much today. Those guys were not polite, those 1870s players. And in order to get the owners of those teams to agree to some uniformity, which is to say they would all wear uniforms of same ilk, and they would have the same number of players on their roster, and they would play the same number of games, he promised them that going forward in perpetuity, they would have complete rights to market their territory. So back then, you're talking about, there was a team in Kentucky, and there was the Reds, and and Chicago, and it wasn't a big deal. There were no markets back then uh, to exploit. But once it spread west, and Los Angeles grew to be a behemoth, and once that New York City grew from what it was back then into an economic juggernaut, same with Chicago. Your territory, where you could raise your money, was predicated on how big your territory was. It became impossible. There's no way the Pittsburgh Pirates, so they seem to be suddenly spending some money. And I have a guess why that is, but
Bring back Clemente Stargell in the good old days. I mean,
r- I mean, there's two plays I can think of, lately. I always say to people, can you think of a time when the most important play of a World Series or postseason is something other than a home run? And
yeah.
the answer would be Clemente's throw from right field against the Orioles that Jim Palmer sees in his dreams. And it's also, how about the wheel play that Mookie Betts put on this fall, when he just decided, this looks like a really good time to put that play on. And he meets up with his infielders. It's like the little boys on the sandlot used to do. Let's do this, and they would diagram it in the dirt. Um, Otherwise, it's all home runs, and it's boring, frankly. But
Yep.
going back to the financial stuff, yeah, they've got a really institutionally problematic economic deal, and because Marvin Miller was the genius that he was, and created free agency, they are not giving that up. The union is not going to give that up. They may look at the NBA style of free agency and the NFL. They're not going to give up unfettered free agency, which is what baseball, and only baseball, has. So how do you spread the money around? After the last crippling strike that, caused people to flee from stadiums 94, 95 when the World Series was canceled, they put in what's called a luxury tax system. So if Steve Cohen spends, $765 million on yet another player to keep Juan Soto company in that tax bracket, then his luxury tax, what he has to pay into the pockets of the low budget teams goes up, right? I mean, that's the way it works. My theory is that as long as we have that system, and since I don't believe the union is ever going to agree to, what they should agree to, frankly, um, let's just make the percentage of tax higher. But at the same time, what you come to find out is part of the problem that the players so distrust the owners is lots of teams, notably the Pirates, the Rays, the A's, don't spend the money that they get from the luxury taxes the way that the collective bargaining agreement from 22 requires them to. It says you have to spend it on payroll. In fact, you have to spend 150% of it on payroll, and they don't. They pocket it. And that makes there's still grievances pending from 2019 and 2020, because that's what owners do, and that's why players don't trust them. So
Yeah.
that's
So what I want to do is go back a few years and understand how did your love of baseball actually germinate, and what were your earliest baseball memories that kind of got you hooked?
well, my grandmother's building was called the Yankee Arms, and it had a stained glass window in the entryway with crossed bats over a heraldic shield. And to be close to my grandmother was to be close to the Yankees. And when she died, which she did in 65, at age 74, what did I have left? I had the New York Yankees.
And the
And
Horace Clarke years.
oh God, yes. Um, and she was the person who she was very feminine, very my grandfather was a tailor, and she was a bookkeeper, but she was very feminine and she didn't know from baseball. She never stepped foot in Yankee Stadium, which was, like 600 feet from her house, right? So what did she do? She had a granddaughter who loved baseball. She took me by the hand and we went downtown on the local CC train, which stopped at 161st Street. And she took me to Saks Fifth Avenue to buy a baseball glove. Why, you ask, would somebody go to Saks Fifth Avenue to buy a baseball glove? Because that's where they had the best of everything. And she wanted the best for me. It was fortuitous that it was, beginning of the baseball season. It was spring. It was fortuitous that they had a display in the window of a woman in a Yankee jacket, a mannequin wearing a Sammy Esposito glove on her hand. And my grandmother announced that she would have that for me. And the, you know, perplexed salesman said, "What, madam, that's not for sale." My grandmother said, "I'll have that for my granddaughter." That went on for another couple of times, and we took Sammy Esposito home with us.
So you worked for the Washington Post from 1979 to 1988, which is pretty much in those days a decidedly male dominant position back then. So
Yeah.
why did you leave, and what did you spend most of your time doing after you left?
I left because I had two kids, and they're adopted. And the great liberal Washington Post at that point did not have equivalent maternity benefits for adoptive mothers and birth mothers, as we say in the adoption world. And so I had to stay home. And the adoption agency required me to stay home, and the Post required me to not get any benefits. So I stayed home and I wrote a novel called Squeeze Play, which is probably more accurate and more factual than anything else I've written. But it's it's not really biographical in the sense that, my mother didn't leave my father, I mean, I changed every personal detail I could, but it's very on point in terms of what it was like to cover baseball in those days as a female reporter when it was still pretty new.
So you wrote books about three baseball legends. What made you choose Mantle, Ruth, and Koufax to write about?
Everybody thinks that writers have complete control over what they do, and that's not, nah, nah. I had a friend, an editor, who had been an editor and a former columnist at the New York Daily News, Dave Hershey, who had become an editor at HarperCollins, the book publisher, and he came to me with the idea of doing Sandy Koufax. And I said, no, I hated him. I hated him for what he did to Mickey Mantle in '63. You remember how bad he made Mantle and all the other Yankees look, striking out 15 guys in game one of the '63 World Series. Um, and it was pointed out to me by friends and family that that was about the
You hold
stupidest
long grudges.
yeah, that was about the stupidest thing I could do. And I didn't think it was likely to happen anyway, because Koufax, of course, was known by reputation to be, almost misanthropic. And, I didn't think he would ever return a call. It took a number of months. I sent letters to Fred Wilpon, his buddy who owned your Mets for a long time, and
Don't
to
remind me.
Donald Fear, who who succeeded Marvin Miller as executive director of the Players Association, and I knew that they would be able to get the letters to him. And I'm sitting here one day, and the phone rings, and the voice says, "Hi, this is Sandy," and I'm like,
Not a chance, right?
uh, "Well, there are very few people who are on a first name basis with the
Yeah,
universe, and he's one of them."
yeah.
And I don't know what came over me, except that, as you can tell, I like to talk. Um, but I just started talking, and he is so polite. He is just like, my God, the man's going to be 90 years old this week. He still has the best manners of anybody I know. And so I just kept talking, and he didn't interrupt. And I told him my whole life story. I told him about my grandmother. I told him about my adopted kids because I presumed he was adopted by Irving Koufax, his father having left the family, abandoned the family when Sandy was 3. And and he didn't interrupt. And finally, after an hour and a half, he said, "Well, Ms. Leavy, I still don't have any interest in your book, but if you want to come down to Vero and talk to me about it, that's okay." And I went, "Yes." And it was an idiosyncratic idea. I wasn't looking to do the trashy, People magazine version of his life. I wanted to talk about the issues that his career illustrated because, of course, he comes in as a bonus baby in 1955 when the base salary, I think, was 6,000 or 6,500. I don't memorize these things, but it was nothing. It was bupkis. And and at the end of his career, he and Drysdale are holding out. It's the first players union. It's a very small union, as Sandy says, but they held out together, and it was a pure demonstration of the power of labor to extort and promote change. And it was much more significant than people realized in the change, the balance of power.
Has there ever been a ball player, to your knowledge, where the first half of their career was very mediocre and the second half of the career made him into what I consider to be the greatest pitcher ever?
It's a really great question, and I've never been asked it. And I don't know, honestly. It makes sense that that's what happened to Sandy. He wasn't a pitcher when I mean, he went to Cincinnati, and after he arrived, he walked on the basketball court, and then they gave him a scholarship, because he had big hands and a great vertical leap for a white guy. And and he only went out for the baseball team, both in Brooklyn and in Cincinnati because it was more fun to go with the baseball team to New Orleans in this for spring break than it was to stay home. And all his buddies in Brooklyn played baseball. But he wasn't a pitcher. I mean, he knew how to throw a ball hard, but he didn't know where his release point was. And it took him basically 6 years to figure it out. I mean, the transformation was in the spring of 1960. And if Walter Alston had played him more, had used him, um, maybe he would have developed sooner. But Alston didn't trust him. Not hard to understand why. Um, and it took 6 years. And Norm Sherry, the nice Jewish boy catcher, known as Catcher Face, to go out to the mound in Orlando as a B game in spring training in Orlando. And Sandy had walked the bases full. One pitcher was hung over and missed the Dodger plane. So there were only two pitchers. And Norm goes out and says, "For Christ's sake, Sandy, you got to throw the ball over the plate, or we're gonna be here all day." And in his frustration, he said, "You want to see me throw the ball through the plate? I'll throw the ball through the plate." And he took something off of it. That's all he had to do, you know? So when he sees these guys today with the max heave, not knowing where the ball is going, he knows from where he speaks. He was
Hmm.
that guy too back in the
Yep.
day.
So instead of 105 miles an hour, maybe 98 miles an hour would be okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Take some of the heat off.
I wouldn't be able to hit either, would you?
I don't think so. It would have been a different story today. It wouldn't be on this podcast right now.
Yeah.
That's for sure. So, I'm glad to see that one of my favorite players of all time has lived up to their expectations off the field as well. Because, as you know, a lot of people, you don't want to meet your favorite players off the
Right.
field. So, who were some of your favorite players that you actually met that lived up to your expectations or exceeded them?
Does it have to be just in baseball?
Well, we are talking baseball right now, but
Well,
I wouldn't mind hearing about other athletes.
Sandy is the ultimate.
Mm,
I mean, Dusty Baker, who was, of course, a player,
yeah, yeah.
and then the manager of the Astros
He
and the
was tough on umpires, wasn't he?
he was the best human being in the game,
Wow.
bar none. In this, I mean, really a good guy. And you know what? Buck Showalter isn't far behind him. I like, it's not popular to say this in certain precincts in like Boston and Yankee Stadium, but I like Bregman. I really think he's a thoughtful guy. Where he ends up. I mean, he's doing what Scott Boras tells him to do. He's a free agent now, everybody, and he's getting as much money as he can, and that fans hate that and think it's mercenary. Well, it is mercenary. But guess what? They get to do that too in their jobs if they want to. They're not held in perpetuity by some custom or legal clause that, the reserve clause was what bound players in perpetuity. And that's why I say they're not giving up free agency. I like Bregman a lot. I like J.P. Crawford a lot. These are
Okay.
guys in the book. Rich Hill, the pitcher for the Dodgers, who pitched um, uh, 44, just he's 45 now, pitched for 14 teams, including the Royals, the last one last year. Um, he made himself into a guy who was good enough to lose two perfect games. Um, I love Rich. Rich, I mean, and the other athlete, I mean, I worked for Billie Jean King, so I really like her, but Martina Navratilova is an extraordinary woman.
Wow. That's good to hear that. So, if you had to write a fourth book about a legend, would it be DiMaggio, Clemente, Pete Rose, Nolan Ryan, perhaps?
Um, well, let me go down the list. I have two rules. One is if I think somebody has done a subject biographically, as well as it's ever going to be done,
You'll pass.
I'm not gonna
Yeah,
go at it. So, who wants to write a clip job about DiMaggio after Richard Ben Kramer's book on DiMaggio?
fair enough.
I'm not going there. And the second rule is I won't write a subject that a friend has done prior, whether I think it's a good book or a bad book or whatever it is, I just won't do it. So um, I won't write about a scumbag like Pete Rose, and it's recently been done. Um, and we've gotten to the point in this country where, really you have to speak the language. I mean, my agent suggested Mariano, the last great relief pitcher,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
But and there's an interesting story there, but I don't speak Spanish, and I don't think it's fair or ethical to take on a subject where you can't communicate in their language, where you're going to miss all the nuance and it's just not right. And it was suggested also that I do Nolan Ryan. Why? Not because, well, there hasn't really been a very good book about him, so there's that. But simply because Texas is so big, it would be a big niche market. That's
Hmm.
why it was suggested. I don't know who's left to do.
Hmm.
I really think that's hard. And so
Do you
you
like
see,
to write better? Obviously, all your books are about old timers. I mean, are you okay with writing somebody a little more contemporary?
I tried once. I suggested a book on the core four, the four Yankees who played their
Yeah.
careers. Not because they were Yankees so much, but because the whole idea of playing out a long career with the same people is so it was, it
Is
was
that Jeter, Pettit, and
Jeter, Pettit,
like
Mariano, and
Posada?
Posada. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, it was bad enough to deal with two agents. When I started to have to deal with three and four, I was like, oh no,
Yes, that could be a headache.
this is not gonna work. Um, I don't know. I couldn't, the reason I did the book I did, the reason I'm going to be your commissioner is because I couldn't think of another guy who's present day. Oh, people don't have access to them anymore. You can't get to know people anymore the way, Grantland Rice knew Babe Ruth. You don't ride a train car together, you don't get drunk together, you don't go out and check out the farmers' daughters together.
You don't
All
write the IRT like Jackie Robinson did in the day or Gil
right,
Hodges, like
right.
yeah.
It doesn't happen. So you can't, it is the paradox that at a time when the rules about what you can write about someone are so much looser than they were before we had family newspapers, and you can't say that in a family newspaper. I made the mistake of describing a urinal at the start of the New York Marathon when it got really big that first year, and I almost got fired for it.
I
You
ran
can't
it in
say
1980, so I know
I covered
16,000
that.
people back then.
That may have
Alberto
been.
Salazar, the winner.
Yeah, that may have been the year of the, denouement
Yeah,
of
right
the
on the heels
urinal.
of Bill Rogers dominating the sport.
Yep. Yeah, I
Yeah,
was in
that
that
was my
truck.
days.
I was in the truck right in front of you,
Oh my goodness, the good
blowing
old
gas
days.
in your face. Um,
Yeah,
so, how can you get to know them if you can't talk to them?
yeah.
Access to players is so limited now. Um,
Mm.
and so what are you going to write? You're going to write what other people have said.
Well, you wrote this incredible book, which I've been reading, and I can't put it down. Make me commissioner. So, how serious are you about commission? And if you were the commissioner, what exactly would you change? What has to change immediately?
The first thing that has to change, um, and I'm ready to serve.
You are. Okay, you
If
take the
called,
job?
I'll take the job.
Okay.
Um, First thing that has to change is Major League Baseball has to learn to market its stars. Why can't I think of somebody today to write about? Because they don't know how to, you know, the way Tinseltown did, the way Babe Ruth did, they don't know how to create and generate marketing for these guys. Yes, Ohtani. Yes, Ohtani. Just one
Otani and
thing.
Judge. Otani, that's all you hear. Otani and Judge.
A judge can, a judge really could until recently walk down the street in New York, and the only reason people would notice him was not because he was Aaron Judge, but because he was this big galoot walking with two little Frankfurter dogs, and everybody, it's like a sight gag, I mean, he's so big that, he got noticed, but it's not because anybody has any idea really who he is or any desperate um, need to know. I'm afraid he's going to end up being like some other great athletes who, never win the big one because what is Brian Cashman doing? I don't
Mm.
understand. Ugh. Anyway, eh,
Spending too
so
much time on the NYY Steakhouse, maybe.
yeah, I would never. I was asked to write about Pete Rose. Never. Mm-mm-mm-mm. Anyway, so because I couldn't think of another biography that I wanted to do, I looked around and it was at that time when um just before COVID and just after the StatCast era began. That's when began to be able to measure absolutely everything that moves on a baseball field in terms of speed and angle and what where what when where when and people were staying away in droves. They were voting with their feet. And the analytic shenanigans made games longer and longer. And more to the point, they made the pace of play intolerable.
You're right. The Wall Street Journal says that like it's only like 17 minutes and 58 seconds of action in a 3-hour game. So you're sitting there waiting for, just a few minutes of actual excitement.
Truth to
And
tell,
it
there
is tough.
isn't.
You better have big hot dogs.
Truth to tell, there isn't much more than that in an NFL game. But the NFL has a marketing machine. They have smarts. I mean, if baseball was smart, what they'd be doing today is counter marketing against the NFL, saying, you know what? Guess what, guys? Bring your children back to baseball, the sport they may remember. Because when doctors have the breakthrough that's coming, where they can diagnose and visualize brain damage in 14-year-olds who have been playing pee-wee football since they were 6. There's a reason that the NFL is promoting flag football in the Olympics. They know they're smarter about it than baseball. First thing that has to happen is we have to rebuild an audience for baseball because people like you and me who have supported the game more passionately than perhaps we should have done um, are not going to be climbing up those stairs that much
I
longer.
don't want to see 7 relief pitchers,
No,
7 innings in a row.
no,
I like
no.
the old days when you can get a guy like Don Drysdale with a few scoreless innings, and
Right.
then a big scoreless streak.
Well,
I like
that's my
complete
second
games.
thing. So the first thing is we're going to let all kids 10 years old and under, accompanied by a sober adult, get in free. We need to build a new generation of fans, and you can't do it without getting them in the ballpark. And it's so expensive that most people can't
Oh my
afford.
God, yeah. I mean, what it cost me $1.99 to get into Shea Stadium in the old days, and like it's
Yeah.
crazy. It is crazy today. You're right. It's like a
And
week's salary.
so I had a friend of mine do a breakdown of numbers. I'm going to ask him to update it actually tomorrow. An economist at the University of Wisconsin La Crosse, his name is Mike Haupert, and he took the Cubs menu from 23, which is when I went around the game seeing how the new rules worked. And if the Cubs had let 10-year-olds in, everybody 10 and under in free, and a grandpa bought the kid a small hot dog, a small Coke, cotton candy, and a small cap, it would have cost the Cubs all of $4 million. Now, that's not chump change to me, but to any one of the 30 owners of a Major League Baseball franchise, that is chump change. And that year, 1923, is the same year that they paid Jason Hayward $23 million to play for the Dodgers. I
And
mean, there's
I'm still crying because the Mets wouldn't pay Tom Seaver $200,000 in 1977 and ship them off to the Reds. And it seems like yesterday, and I'm still crying about that.
it
I'm
was a
thinking about today,
shondo.
$200,000, like what is an extra few $1,000s? I mean,
You know,
geez.
there were some general managers in New York who, M. Donald and
Oh,
George
M.
White.
Donald Grant, please.
Oh yeah, and George
Oh my
Weiss.
God! Look who we shipped off. Ken Singleton, Amos Otis. Let's see, Tom Seaver, Jerry Koosman, Nolan Ryan.
That Nolan Ryan trade for Fregosi is like
Oh,
maybe the worst ever.
Joe Foy for Amos Otis, and I mean, it just went on and on and on. Think about how good that team could have been. Oh my God! After 73,
Yep,
it was like from 73 to 86. I might as well just not
yep,
looked at baseball.
yep. So anyway, so we're gonna let kids in free, and then you bring up the issue of the pitching. The reason we don't have pitchers like Drysdale and Koufax anymore is because analytics have completely skewed the way pitchers are used, and they're
Yeah,
all taught to throw max heave, and you can't throw max heave for 100 pitches, which has become the standard of what you're allowed to throw. So, you don't have the matchups,
yeah.
and matchups were the glue that held baseball together, whether it was a pitcher against a slugger or whether it was a pitcher against another pitcher. You'd say, I'd like to go out and see that. I want to, will Greg Maddux, ever figure out how to pitch Tony Gwynn? The answer was no, he never did figure it out. But you'd want to see, right? And all these machinations that, born of algorithms and data science, they're smart. For the most part, they're accurate, they work, but they don't relate to what the game of baseball. And the
The
formula.
unpredictability of baseball, right?
Yes,
Which is the joy of it. Because you mentioned that in your book, why do you want to predict, what's going to happen? That, the joy of baseball is actually in not knowing. And then you say you talked to Joe Torre in your book, and you say that he said that they're trying to make an imperfect game perfect. And that sums it up, an
yes,
imperfect game perfect. Like
yes.
leave it alone. Let it just flow.
You can predict, what's going to happen 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
Um, you can't predict the 10th time because it hasn't happened yet. And in baseball, that 10th time, it can go either way. I mean,
Oh,
who's going to predict that Rajay Davis is going to hit a critical home run in the seventh game of the 2015 World Series and to give the then Cleveland Indians a chance against the Cubs?
I read that in your book.
Yeah,
I wonder what would happen in 1969 if the Chicago Cubs didn't pinch hit Jimmy Qualls in the bottom of the ninth inning with one out and ruin Tom Seaver's perfect game and ruin my life because I was,
right.
all those years waiting for the first no hitter.
Yeah.
And how many more years did I have to wait for just one no hitter in our entire history?
And eliminating those kind of opportunities for fans to see is another reason that I think people have lost interest and why people think baseball isn't exciting. There's nothing more exciting than a great double play or Clemente throwing somebody out at third base from the deepest reaches of right field,
Or Carl
you know,
Furillo.
or or a
Yeah.
great, or I'm going to say this wrong, as I said, I don't speak Spanish. Andy Pajes, is that how you say his name? Climbing over Kiki Hernandez in center field to get that ball in the World Series this year. You can't predict those things. If you could predict those things, you'd be an uber genius. I mean, why did the Washington Senators win in 1924? Because there was a pebble on the infield, and 2 times the pebble got in the way of ground balls that bounced over the third baseman's head, the Giants' third baseman's head. And so, guess what? The Senators won. And
Or the Mookie Wilson grounder to Bill Buckner.
right. And
Thank God something went right.
there, and that's the human what players told me and managers and executives told me over and over. That's the
Mm,
human element that is being squeezed out of the game by virtue of making decisions solely based on analytics. Analytics are great. They're smart. They work for the most part. They give valuable information so they can inform a decision, but they shouldn't be making the decisions.
Well, Jane, we've come to the end of our show. You and I can probably go on forever. I can
Yes,
tell you
we
one
can.
thing. Your book, Make Me Commissioner, I Know What's Wrong with Baseball and How to Fix It, is a page turner. And I got to tell you something. I would vote for you for commissioner, and
Thank you.
I would even be your lieutenant commissioner.
You're hired.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, my good man. Thank you so much.